I'll begin this lecture by continuing with a little bit of history, and then I want to move into an engagement and genuine inquiry with you about some possibilities for the Anglican Studies program going forward. When the Anglican Studies program moved to Iliff in 1996 and began to use the Iliff Chapel, we simply continued what had already been a pattern over at St. Thomas, and that is there was a weekly service of worship on Thursdays at noontime. That was a full Eucharist in which every student in the Anglican Studies program was required to come. It was a sung Eucharist. We had an organist whom we engaged to assist us with our music, and for that Eucharist we would invite clergy from around the diocese to come and to celebrate and to preach at that Eucharist, and then to stay for the hour after the Eucharist for lunch, to meet with the students, to talk about their own ministry, to engage students about their seminary education. And in doing so, we were allowed to really be exposed to a number of priests in the diocese. It was a grand way of connecting with clergy in the diocese, with various parishes, with various worship styles, with various preaching styles, with various theologies and types of commitment. The diocese in Colorado is really quite diverse. There are tremendously liberal parishes in the diocese, and there are also conservative parishes, and we invited them all. And there was a real sense of ownership for the Anglican Studies program created by that opportunity that the Thursday Eucharist provided. In addition then to the Thursday Eucharist, students in the Anglican Studies program were expected, as they were able, to participate in community worship at Iliff, and historically, and it is still the case, that community worship takes place around 11 o'clock on Wednesdays and varies from week to week, but is offered on a weekly basis at the Iliff School of Theology. And then for a few years, starting in 2010, Catherine Volland and I had sung morning prayer at 8 o'clock in the morning in the chapel at Iliff. It never attracted a large crowd, but it attracted a few, and not simply Episcopal students, but other students who were interested in that devotional opportunity. All of that changed when Iliff went to the block program of offering courses. That is, courses that met early in the morning, starting at 8 o'clock, and lasting in one big block until noon, and then another block that started at 1 o'clock and lasted till the late afternoon, and then a third block that started in the early evening and lasted until almost 10 o'clock in the evening at Iliff. That block program, where classes only met one day a week, and meant that students might be there on a Thursday morning, but not on a Thursday afternoon, or maybe not Thursday at all. They would be there on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. That really threw a wrench into our worship program for the Anglican Studies program. We struggled for a couple of years to continue with our Thursday Eucharist and to move it to noon, and to try to shorten it in ways so that it left a little time for people to grab some lunch before the afternoon block began, and trying to wedge it in so that people, if they had been there in the morning block, didn't have to stay too long in the afternoon if they had commitments on Thursday. But really, it became an offering with diminishing returns, so that there were, 2 or 3 or 4 at best. And I tried to link it to Professor Unju Kim's preaching class, but it never really caught on, and we had to abandon it. And so now what the Anglican Studies program is doing is offering at best one community worship each quarter on Wednesday, hoping to attract not only Anglican Studies students but the larger ILIF community. We weren't able to work that in for the winter quarter, given other commitments that ILIF had for its community worship program. We're going to be doing it in the spring on a Wednesday, and the bishop will be joining us if we can work out an appropriate date. But with this block program at ILIF, worship has for the Anglican Studies community has really become quite difficult. And I, as director of the Anglican Studies program, really am quite concerned about worship as part of our formative process in Anglican Studies. And I want to spend a few minutes then inquiring with you about what might be possible. It seems to me that one thing we might require of all Anglican Studies students at ILIF is to have a kind of contract for a rule of life. It doesn't mean that every student would have to have the same rule of life, but that every student in the Anglican Studies would commit to a rule of life for daily prayer and scripture reading and reflection, and would draft that contract and submit it to me, and have an opportunity to reflect with me about that contract on a regular basis throughout the year and throughout their time in the Anglican Studies program. I'd be interested in hearing your feedback about that, and if you think that is a viable way of at least having some commitment to worship life that was structured. But of course that's kind of singular and individual, and doesn't crack the nut with respect to corporate worship. I'm thinking that we need to have, as a part of our Anglican Studies curriculum, a course on Anglican spirituality, its history, as well as its contemporary manifestations. I'm wondering if a course on Anglican spirituality can be taught realistically online, or if you think it needs to be a hybrid course, or perhaps a course in Anglican spirituality has to be a required course that is a summer course where students are expected to come to campus and to have a face-to-face opportunity that is a requirement for the Anglican Studies program. We can certainly put that in place. That's not impossible. It could be easily done. I'd appreciate your input about that. In between these YouTube lectures, I have given you the URL for a blog by Canon Charles LaFond at St. John's Cathedral, which he does daily, which is called the Daily Sip. I'm wondering if part of our formation might be to have a blog like this with some interaction among all of the students in the Anglican Studies program that would give us that communal sense, that Anglican Studies identity, where we could touch base about our worship life and our spiritual formation. I hope you'll sign up for Charles LaFond's blog. It's really excellent. When you go to that website, there's an opportunity for signing up to have it posted to your email daily. I think you'll enjoy receiving it and participating in it. It's certainly something that I have found very enriching in my own life. I'm wondering if perhaps we might commit to doing a reading each quarter for that deals with some aspect of spirituality, where we would be reading a book together and discussing it online, perhaps taking advantage of Google in a more appropriate way than we have so far. It would be not for credit, but something that we would engage in as a part of our kind of voluntary spiritual formation as a group. Let me know if you think that's a possibility. And one final thing that I'd like to raise as a possibility is, again, a summer residential, brief online or a brief face-to-face practicum on liturgy here at ILIF, where we do some hands-on work. I really do think that's an essential part of Anglican Studies identity training and formation that we're going to have to include in our curriculum if we're going to accomplish the goals that Louis Weil laid out for us in the book you've been reading this quarter. Appreciate your input about any of these things or ideas that you have about enriching our spiritual formation and our worship life in the Anglican Studies program in light of the digital age and the transformation of seminary education in which we are participating. Thanks so much for that.